My dad laughed when he said it. That's what made it worse. We stood in the church fellowship hall, surrounded by the annual Christmas planning committee, and he told everyone I was too irresponsible to handle traditions this year. He said it like a funny story, shaking his head with that practiced smile that made people lean in and listen. The committee members chuckled nervously, unsure if they should join in. A few relatives nodded like they understood completely. My aunt actually patted his shoulder sympathetically, like he was dealing with some difficult burden. My dad reached over and took the venue keys from my hand before I could react. The metal felt cold against my palm and then it was gone. He gave them to Mrs. Patterson from the Historical Society. She looked uncomfortable but took them anyway, avoiding my eyes. Just like that I was done. Reassigned. Erased. I kept smiling because that's what you do when someone humiliates you in front of 20 people who respect them more than you. My face burned, my throat felt tight, but I stood there nodding like it was reasonable, like I agreed with his assessment. No one defended me. No one questioned him. The meeting continued like nothing happened. They discussed tree lighting schedules and food drive logistics while I stood against the wall, suddenly invisible. I'd been running these events quietly for 3 years. Now I was the irresponsible one everyone felt justified ignoring. Christmas in our town wasn't just family dinners and presents. It was a whole production that consumed November and December completely. Tree lighting ceremonies in the town square that required coordinating with the electric company and fire department. Food drives coordinated with 4 different churches, each with their own requirements and schedules. Parades that required street permits and liability insurance and negotiations with the police department about road closures. Everything tangled together into this massive community event that people talked about all year long. I'd been handling the behind-the-scenes logistics since I was 22, working spreadsheets and vendor contracts while my dad handled the public-facing stuff. He gave speeches at the kick-off events, his voice booming across the town square. He shook hands with the mayor and smiled for newspaper photos. He loved that part, the visibility, the recognition, the feeling of being important. I handled the actual stress. I confirmed equipment rentals 3 times because vendors always forgot. I chased down missing permits. I mediated when the Lutheran choir and Methodist choir both wanted the same performance slot. My dad got the credit and the applause. I got the exhausting, invisible work that made everything look effortless. And honestly, I'd been fine with that arrangement for a long time. I liked organizing things. I liked knowing events ran smoothly because I'd planned every detail. But apparently, my dad decided I wasn't needed anymore. After that meeting, everything changed fast. People stopped calling me completely. Vendors who used to text me directly about delivery times and setup requirements started emailing my dad instead. Volunteers I'd worked with for years, people I'd considered friends, went completely silent. My phone used to buzz constantly with questions. Now it just sat there, dark and quiet. It was like someone flipped a switch, and suddenly I was the person everyone had been warned about. The unreliable one, the irresponsible kid who couldn't be trusted. I'd check my phone obsessively and see nothing. No questions about donation drop-off times, no confirmations about stage setup or sound equipment, just silence and a few texts from friends who didn't know what had happened. My dad's phone, though, constantly ringing. He'd answer with this weary, patient tone like he was shouldering such a heavy burden. He started telling people he appreciated their understanding during this transitional year. Transitional, like I'd quit, like I'd failed somehow and he was graciously stepping in to save Christmas. I wanted to scream every time I heard him use that word, but I didn't. I just watched it happen, this quiet rewriting of reality where I became the problem and he became the hero. It was so smooth, so believable that even I started questioning myself. Maybe I had been irresponsible. The doubt crept in like poison. At home, my dad doubled down on the narrative. He told my aunt over coffee that I'd lost focus lately and needed a break from responsibility. He told my uncle during a weekend visit that I'd been overwhelmed, and he didn't want to pressure me. He framed everything like parental concern, like he was protecting me from my own limitations. But his tone always carried this edge of relief underneath the worry, like he'd finally found the excuse he'd been looking for. He wanted full credit, he always had. I'd just been useful enough that he tolerated sharing the workload before. Now he had a reason to take it all and he was running with it. During family dinners, he'd sigh heavily and mention how much work Christmas had become this year. How he was basically handling everything alone, and it was more demanding than he'd expected. My mom would give me these worried looks across the table, like she believed him completely. Like she thought I'd actually dropped the ball. I stopped trying to explain. What was I supposed to say? That I'd been doing this job successfully for years and he just decided I hadn't? that he humiliated me in public for no reason. It sounded defensive and bitter. So I stayed quiet and let him tell his version to anyone who would listen. The story spread through our family like wildfire. But here's the thing nobody knew. I still got the late-night calls when things went wrong, not from my dad, who apparently believed his own narrative that he was handling everything perfectly. From the people who actually knew how things worked, who understood the systems I'd built. Desperate calls from volunteers when something went wrong. Panicked texts from vendors when permits got delayed or equipment didn't arrive. They called me because they knew I'd fix it, even though I supposedly wasn't involved anymore. And I did fix it, quietly, without looping my dad in, without taking credit. Because if I said no and walked away completely, events would fail. Kids wouldn't get their holiday parade. Families counting on food boxes wouldn't get them. The whole town would suffer, and somehow that would still be my fault. So I answered the calls at midnight. I rerouted donation trucks that got sent to the wrong address. I expedited permit applications that had been filed incorrectly. I solved problems my dad didn't even know existed because nobody wanted to bother him. Then I went back to being invisible, watching him take credit for a smoothly running operation he barely understood. It felt pathetic. It felt like I was enabling the exact situation that hurt me. But I kept doing it anyway, telling myself it was about the town, not my pride. 2 weeks before Christmas, things started falling apart in ways my dad couldn't ignore. Permits for the tree lighting ceremony got delayed because someone filed the paperwork wrong, using last year's dates. A donation truck loaded with food and toys got misrouted to the wrong church and sat in a parking lot for 6 hours. The choir nearly backed out completely over scheduling confusion, and losing them would have ruined the ceremony. Each time something went wrong, I got the panicked call. Each time I fixed it. I called the city clerk's office and walked them through the permit correction, explaining the situation until they agreed to rush it through. I personally drove across town to the stranded truck and redirected the driver, helping unload boxes in the cold. I mediated a conference call between 2 choir directors at 11 at night, finding a compromise. My dad never knew any of this happened. He was too busy giving interviews to the local paper about keeping beloved traditions alive through hard work. I read the article online while sitting in my car after fixing the truck situation. It quoted him extensively. It mentioned the planning committee in one sentence. It didn't mention me at all. I sat there staring at that article on my phone, feeling so small and used. But I just drove home and went to bed. My dad started telling people he was carrying everything alone this year. He said it with this tired, noble smile that made people feel sorry for him. The more he said it, the more people believed it. They'd see him at the grocery store and stop him to thank him for his hard work. They'd tell him how much the town appreciated his sacrifice. And he'd accept it graciously, like he really was doing it all himself, like I didn't exist. Like the late nights and emergency fixes just happened magically, I stopped correcting anyone. What was the point? They believed what they wanted to believe. My dad was visible, charismatic, trusted. I was just his kid who apparently couldn't handle responsibility. The story was already written. I could either fight it and look bitter or accept it and disappear. I chose to disappear. I showed up to family events and smiled. I helped when people called me directly, then erased myself from the narrative afterward. I became a ghost in my own life, watching someone else take credit for my work. The invisibility hurt worse than the initial humiliation. At least humiliation meant people saw you, acknowledged your existence. This was complete erasure, like I'd never been there at all. 2 weeks before Christmas, the mayor's office called me directly, not my dad, me. The mayor's assistant explained that the televised kickoff event was in serious trouble. A major sponsor had pulled out last minute over budget concerns, leaving a gap in funding and programming. They needed help salvaging the event before the broadcast date, and apparently someone had recommended me specifically. She asked if I could coordinate replacement sponsors and rework the schedule. I hesitated. I knew exactly how this would play out. If I fixed it successfully, my dad would somehow get the credit. If I didn't help and it failed, the town would blame me. But the assistant sounded genuinely desperate. The event mattered. Kids were expecting it. Families planned their entire holiday around it. So I said yes, even though I knew I was probably making a mistake. I told her I'd handle it quietly and asked her not to mention my involvement to my dad yet. She agreed immediately, sounding relieved. I spent the next 3 days practically living on the phone, pitching local businesses and reworking the runoff show. I patched gaps my dad didn't even know existed. The mayor's assistant thanked me repeatedly. I told her it was fine, that I didn't need acknowledgement. I coordinated 3 replacement sponsors in 48 hours. a local credit union that wanted community visibility, a family-owned hardware store that had been in town for generations, a car dealership that wanted exposure before year-end sales. I reworked the entire event timeline to accommodate their branding requirements and stage appearances. I confirmed equipment rentals and updated the script for the MC. I sent revised run of shows to everyone involved, following up personally to make sure they understood the changes. It was exhausting work that consumed every spare minute, but it worked. The event was saved. The mayor's assistant called me Friday night to say everything was locked in. She said I'd done more in 3 days than most people could accomplish in 3 weeks. She said the mayor specifically wanted to acknowledge my work publicly during the broadcast. I panicked at that suggestion. I told her that wasn't necessary, that I was just helping out. She didn't push it, but I could hear the confusion in her voice. Like she couldn't understand why anyone would want to stay invisible after doing something significant. I didn't explain. How do you tell someone that visibility in your own family means punishment, that credit means conflict? I just thanked her and hung up, feeling anxious. My dad heard about the mayor's call through someone else at a committee meeting. One of the members mentioned it casually, asking if he knew I'd been coordinating with City Hall. That night he cornered me in the kitchen. He didn't yell, he never yelled. He just spoke in this low, controlled voice that made me feel like I'd done something wrong. He told me not to overstep my bounds and embarrass the family. He said the town needed consistency, not my spurts of responsibility. He said if I wanted to help, I should have come to him first instead of going behind his back. I stood there holding a coffee mug, just nodding. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I just said I understood and walked away. Later, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed the conversation over and over. He'd accused me of being inconsistent. Me, the person who'd been fixing his mistakes for weeks without asking for anything. The person who'd saved his reputation without taking credit. And somehow, I was the problem. I was the one embarrassing the family. I didn't sleep much that night, my mind racing with anger and hurt. The night before the kickoff, a critical vendor backed out over insurance issues. The staging company realized their liability coverage didn't extend to televised events and refused to deliver equipment without updated paperwork. My dad panicked. I heard him on the phone, calling committee members in circles, asking if anyone knew how to fix it. He called at least 8 people. He didn't call me. I sat in the living room pretending to watch TV, listening to him spiral, debating whether to step in. Finally, I couldn't take it. The event mattered too much. I went to my room and called the vendor using a contact I'd worked with before. I negotiated temporary coverage, explaining the situation calmly. It took an hour and cost extra money, but it worked. The staging company agreed to deliver as scheduled. I emailed the confirmation to my dad without explanation. He never thanked me, never acknowledged that I'd solved the crisis. The next morning I heard him telling my mom he'd resolved the staging crisis through persistence and his relationships. I heard him say it word for word. I didn't react. I was too tired to care. I'd been reduced to a background utility. By Christmas week I was completely exhausted, not just physically, emotionally, mentally. I felt used and small and erased. I'd spent weeks fixing problems my dad created or ignored, watching him collect praise for work I did in shadows. And the worst part, nobody knew, nobody asked. They just believed his version because it was easier, because he was louder. My dad was everywhere that week, photos in the paper, radio interviews, grocery store handshakes. Everyone thanked him. Everyone told him how much the town appreciated his leadership. And he accepted it all with this humble smile, like he'd carried everything alone. I stopped going out. I couldn't handle people thanking my dad in front of me, complimenting his hard work while I stood there invisible. I stayed home and answered the calls that still came, vendors needing confirmations, volunteers with questions my dad couldn't answer. I helped solve their problems. Then I disappeared again into the background like always. It was a cycle I couldn't break. The kickoff event arrived on Saturday night, brutally cold but clear. The town square was packed with families bundled in winter coats, kids running around, vendors selling hot chocolate. Cameras were set up for the live broadcast, professional equipment with bright lights everywhere. Everything glowed, turning the square into something magical. I stood off to the side behind the barricades, completely unrecognized, just another face in the crowd. My dad was front and center, exactly where he wanted to be. Shaking hands enthusiastically with the mayor, joking with reporters, posing for photos. He looked genuinely happy, confident, successful, like someone who'd earned every bit of the attention. I watched him from the shadows and felt absolutely nothing. Not anger anymore, not even hurt, just this hollow acceptance of reality. This was how it was, this was how it would always be. When the MC called everyone to attention, the crowd quieted. My dad stepped back slightly, smiling expectantly, clearly waiting for the usual thanks. I was already planning my quiet exit, ready to slip away before anyone noticed. The mayor stepped up to the microphone. He started with the usual stuff, thanking sponsors by name, acknowledging volunteers generically, praising community spirit. The crowd clapped politely. My dad nodded along, waiting for his moment. Then the mayor paused deliberately. He looked directly at the camera, his expression shifting to something more serious. He said he wanted to acknowledge someone specifically. Someone who'd worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure Christmas happened. Someone who'd saved the event when it nearly fell apart. He said my name, my full name, out loud on camera, broadcast live to the whole region. The crowd shifted immediately. Heads turned, people looked around trying to figure out where I was standing. My dad's smile froze on his face. I saw it happen, this flicker of complete confusion. The mayor kept going. He credited the late nights, the emergency fixes, the coordination that kept everything on track. He thanked me specifically for holding everything together when it mattered most. The applause was louder this time, real and sustained. I stood there completely stunned. The cameras caught absolutely everything. My dad blinking in confusion, people standing near him whispering. Someone actually pointing toward where I stood. For the first time, the story he'd been telling didn't match the one being broadcast, and he couldn't interrupt it. He couldn't rewrite it. It was live, on television, in front of the entire town. The mayor finished his remarks and gestured toward where I was standing. The crowd parted slightly, and suddenly everyone was looking directly at me. I felt my face burn hot with embarrassment and something else I couldn't name. But I managed a small wave. People clapped louder. Some smiled warmly. A few looked genuinely surprised, like they were recalculating everything they thought they knew. My dad stood frozen near the stage, his expression completely unreadable. When the ceremony continued with the tree lighting countdown, he didn't move. He just stood there, watching the mayor launch into the countdown, slowly realizing that his carefully constructed narrative had just collapsed in the most public way imaginable. I stayed exactly where I was, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. After the event ended, people approached me cautiously. Some apologized directly for believing what they'd been told about me being irresponsible. Others admitted they'd always wondered how things ran so smoothly before this year, but they'd assumed my dad had systems I didn't understand. A few vendors pulled me aside to thank me privately for fixing problems they'd brought to me. It felt completely surreal. For weeks, I'd been invisible. Now suddenly everyone saw me clearly. But it didn't feel triumphant like I might have imagined. It felt exposing, uncomfortable, like I'd been forced into visibility I never wanted. My dad left early, which didn't surprise me. I saw him shaking hands with a few people near the parking area, smiling tightly, then disappearing toward his car. He didn't look at me even once. Didn't say anything or try to talk, just left. I stayed until the crowd thinned, answering questions and accepting thanks I wasn't sure how to receive. When I finally got home much later, the house was completely dark. My dad's car was in the driveway, but he wasn't downstairs. I stood in the kitchen still wearing my coat, feeling drained and uncertain. Nothing felt resolved. It just felt different. My dad didn't speak to me that night. I heard him moving around upstairs, but he never came down. The next morning he was already gone when I woke up. My mom said he'd left early for errands, though she didn't specify what kind. She didn't mention the event, didn't ask how I felt or what happened. Just made coffee and acted like everything was normal. That became the pattern over the next several days. My dad avoided me in a way that felt deliberate. At home he'd flip through TV channels or read the newspaper, never making eye contact. If I walked into a room he'd leave within minutes, making some excuse about needing something. The silence felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Louder somehow in its complete absence of words. I didn't push it. I didn't try to force a conversation. What was there to say? He'd been caught publicly. Everyone knew the truth he'd tried to bury. And now he had to live with the entire town knowing what really happened. I felt bad in a weird way, not for what happened but for how it happened. I never wanted to humiliate him. I just wanted to exist without being erased. Over the next few days, calls started coming in. But this time they all came directly to me. The planning committee asked if I'd be returning next year to coordinate events. Vendors wanted confirmation from the person who actually handles things before they'd commit. Even the mayor's office reached out personally, asking if I'd consider expanding my role in community events. I didn't rush to answer anyone. I needed time to think clearly about what I wanted. Part of me wanted to walk away completely, to let my dad have exactly what he'd wanted all along. Let him handle everything alone for real this time, but another part of me knew I'd just be punishing the town for his mistakes. The events genuinely mattered. The traditions meant something real. Kids deserved their parade. Families deserved their food drives. I couldn't let that fall apart just because my dad and I couldn't figure out how to exist in the same space. So I told people I needed time. I asked for a few weeks to decide what next year would look like. Most understood. A few seemed worried I'd say no. Nobody asked about my dad. That told me everything. My dad finally confronted me on Wednesday night. I was sitting in the living room scrolling through my phone when he walked in and just stood there. He didn't sit down. He just asked bluntly why I'd let him look bad in front of everyone. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. I looked up at him calmly. I didn't yell, I didn't get defensive, I just told him the truth. I said I hadn't said a single word to anyone about him. I'd just done the work I was publicly accused of being too irresponsible to handle. That was literally it. He didn't like that answer. He said I should have come to him first, should have worked through him instead of going around him. I asked him how I was supposed to do that when he'd publicly taken my role away. When he told the whole town I couldn't be trusted. He didn't have an answer for that. He just stood there, jaw tight, staring at me like I'd betrayed him. Like I was the one who'd created this mess. He accused me of being ungrateful for everything he'd built. Said everything he'd done was to build something bigger than both of us. Said I didn't understand the pressure of leadership. I didn't argue or get drawn into defending myself. I just calmly reminded him that he'd taken my role publicly. In front of everyone. Without asking, without warning, without any real justification. I reminded him that he'd spent weeks telling people I was irresponsible while I quietly fixed every single problem he created or couldn't solve. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It had already landed publicly. The whole town had seen it broadcast live. He couldn't rewrite it or spin it anymore. The narrative was out of his control. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression hard. Then he walked out without another word. I heard his bedroom door close firmly upstairs. My mom came down later and asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, though I wasn't sure that was true. She looked like she wanted to say more but didn't. I think she knew. I think she'd always known. She just hadn't wanted to choose sides between us. I declined returning under the same structure. When the committee called to follow up, I told them directly I'd help in a limited, transparent role, or not at all. I said I wouldn't work behind the scenes while someone else took credit publicly. I said I needed clear boundaries and public acknowledgement for my contributions. I expected resistance. I didn't get any. The committee agreed immediately. They said they'd been uncomfortable with how things were handled this year. They said they wanted me involved, but only in a way that felt fair. They didn't ask my dad to lead anything again. They restructured the whole operation, splitting responsibilities across multiple people and creating clear, documented roles. My dad's name wasn't on the organizational chart. I don't know if they told him directly or if he figured it out. Either way, he didn't fight it. He didn't call committee members or try to reclaim his position. He just let it go quietly. Or maybe he knew he didn't have a choice. Either way, it was done and final. That Christmas felt noticeably quieter for me. Fewer late nights spent solving crises. Fewer invisible fixes that nobody acknowledged. Fewer moments of watching someone else take credit while everyone applauded. I coordinated one specific part, the food drive logistics, and left the rest to other capable people. It felt strange at first, stepping back and not controlling everything. But also freeing in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. I didn't have to fix every problem in secret. People knew what I did, they thanked me directly. They valued my work without me having to constantly prove it. My dad attended some of the events, but he stayed on the edges. He didn't give speeches, didn't shake hands with the mayor, didn't pose for photos. He just showed up, watched quietly, and left early. We didn't talk about it, we barely talked at all. The distance between us felt permanent, like something that couldn't be undone. I didn't know if that made me sad or relieved. Maybe both, I just knew it was different. And different felt better than invisible. People finally saw what I contributed when it wasn't hidden behind someone else's name. That mattered more than I expected. Not because I desperately needed validation, but because I needed to exist as a real person with value. I needed to be more than a tool someone used when convenient. The town treated me differently now. They asked my opinion. They included me in planning conversations from the beginning. They respected my time and my work. It wasn't dramatic or life-changing. It was just acknowledgement. Simple, honest acknowledgement. And somehow it made all the difference. My dad still tells the old version to anyone who will listen. I've heard him at family gatherings talking about how he built the Christmas traditions and kept them alive through difficult years. He edits me out completely like I was never there. Some people still believe him, especially relatives who weren't there. Most don't anymore. The ones who were there, who saw the mayor's speech, who know the truth, they just smile politely and change the subject. His version doesn't stick anymore. The town remembers what it saw on national TV. I don't talk about it much when people bring it up. When people ask what happened, I just say I helped coordinate events and I'm glad they went well. I don't trash my dad. I don't tell dramatic stories about being erased or vindicated. I just exist openly without hiding my contributions or apologizing for them. That's enough for me now. My relationship with my dad is still complicated and probably always will be. We're polite at family events. We don't fight or argue in front of people. We don't really talk about anything meaningful. It's like we're distant relatives who happen to share a house sometimes. My mom navigates the middle ground, trying to keep peace without choosing sides. I don't know if it'll ever get better. Maybe it will with time, maybe it won't ever, and this is just how it'll be. I've stopped waiting for him to apologize or acknowledge what happened. That's not coming, and I don't need it anymore to move forward. I needed it once desperately, but now I'm okay without it. I know what I did. The town knows, that's enough. I don't need his validation to exist anymore. Looking back, I think the hardest part wasn't the public humiliation or the erasure. It was the doubt he created. The way his version of events made me question myself constantly, made me wonder if maybe I really was irresponsible like he claimed. That's what hurt most deeply. Not the loss of credit, but the loss of confidence in myself. The mayor's speech didn't just vindicate me publicly. It reminded me that I wasn't crazy, that my work actually mattered. That I hadn't imagined my contributions or exaggerated my role. I'd been there, I'd done the real work, and people noticed even when my dad tried to make them look away. This year I'm coordinating the food drive again. Same role, same work, but this time my name is on the official schedule. People call me directly with questions, they thank me to my face. And my dad, he's not involved at all. He watches from a distance and I let him. I don't need his approval anymore. I don't need his acknowledgement. I just need to keep doing what I'm good at, openly and honestly, without apologizing for existing. That's the real resolution. Not revenge, not dramatic vindication, just the quiet freedom of being seen and valued for who I really am. And for the first time in years, I actually am. Fully, honestly, unapologetically seen. That's enough. That's everything I needed.